Good morning. I'll invite the Honourable Minister responsible for sports to say prayers.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power derive, we beseech Thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations, for the glory of Thy name, and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Premier, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Leader of the Opposition, Ministers of the Cabinet, ex officio members, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for Thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our
Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make His face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of His countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of messages and announcements.
None.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and reports.
None.
Questions to Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
None.
Statements by Honourable Members and Ministers of the Cabinet.
Recognize Honourable Minister responsible for sports.
Madam Speaker, I rise to elaborate on the Ministry of Community Affairs, Youth and Sports supplementary appropriations for the financial years of 2014-15 and 2015-16 in accordance with Section 11.6 of the Public Management and Finance Law. I will also be doing 2016-17 after this, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in regards to the 2014-15 financial year, as you are aware, the former Minister of Home and Community Affairs underwent a change in political leadership in January 2015. Hence, at this time, the ministry was renamed the Ministry of Community Affairs, Youth and Sports to reflect the addition of youth and sports as new subject areas. Based on this change, the Department of Sports, Youth Services Unit, and Cayman Islands Cadet Corps transfer budgets were approved and reflected in the revised 2014-15 budget for the new ministry. In addition to this transfer of the subject areas, Madam Speaker, there was further Cabinet approval to increase TP47 ex gratia payments to seamen by $70,444, so that the pending applications for spouses of deceased seamen could be processed. This increase was offset by a decrease in TP45 youth aftercare payments of $19,844 and $50,600 from TP48 benefit payments to ex-servicemen. Madam Speaker, I will now discuss the supplementary appropriations for the 15-16 financial year by subject area, beginning with community affairs. During the 2015-16 financial year, Madam Speaker, the demand to assist persons with basic needs such as electricity, water, rent, and food increased. Based on the trends observed, the Ministry identified that the allocated funding was insufficient for the needs assessment unit to provide these services through to the end of the financial year. Hence, the ministry reshuffled its budget to increase funding to areas in welfare that were projected to be overspent and offset this by decreasing funding in welfare areas that were not being fully utilized. As a result, Cabinet approval was obtained to decrease NGS 63, school lunches and uniform programs, $300,000, TP 50, preschool assistance, $100,000, TP 60, housing assistance, $250,000, for a total decrease of $650,000. In turn, approval was given to increase NGS 68, rental assistance, for $300,000, TP 43, poor relief vouchers for $150,000, and TP 75, needs assessment support, $200,000, for a total increase of $650,000. Madam Speaker, during the 2015-16 financial year, the ministry also had a request for additional funding from the Children and Youth Services Foundation, better known as KEYS. As you're aware, the KEYS Foundation assists the government in meeting its legal obligations under the Children's Law and the Youth Justice Law for children placed on court orders. The KEYS Foundation, Madam Speaker, is continually evaluating its therapeutic programs and services to ensure that they are providing the best possible care. In February 2016, as a result of its efforts to further strengthen its services, the KEYS Foundation completed the Francis Borden Children's Home expansion, which allowed for the separation of males and females in need of care and protection. This expansion was made possible through the efforts of the chairman and the board of directors, who advocated for and received donations from several private sector companies. Despite the generosity of the private sector, however, the KEYS Foundation was not in a financial position to hire the additional staff required to operate the new expansion at the Francis Borden Children's Home. The KEYS Foundation projected a surplus of $354,491 at the end of 15-16 financial year. However, Madam Speaker, this would have been insufficient to hire the additional staff to operate the expansion. As a result, the request for additional funding of $336,513 was submitted to the ministry in order to ensure that the KEYS Foundation could hire the additional staff needed to provide therapeutic services to up to 8 males placed on care orders. Madam Speaker, at the same time, the ministry also had to address the matter of residential care for the elderly. As we are all aware, the ministry purchases residential care services for the elderly from the Pines Retirement Home, and its services are monitored through a purchase agreement. However, during the 15-16 financial year, the Pines projected an annual operating loss of $225,854. The two primary reasons for this projected deficit were: one, the government had not increased the care rate since 2007, which was $3,100 per month for regular care and $6,500 per month for heavy care; and two, persons who were placed at the Pines as regular care patients became heavy care patients due to experiencing more complicated health issues over time. The government, however, continued to pay for these patients at the regular care rate. Hence, during the 15-16 financial year, the Pines had approximately 9 residents who received heavy care, but for whom the government was only paying for at the regular care rate. Madam Speaker, it was acknowledged that in order for the Pines to cover its operating costs, it would require additional funding to cover the provisions of services to government residents of approximately $225,854. Additionally, given that the Pines would continue to provide heavy care services to government residents during the 16-17 financial year, the ministry decided to contribute supplementary funds to offset expenses incurred by these heavy care residents during the upcoming financial year. This resulted in a total of $400,000 being identified as necessary to stop the Pines Retirement Home from operating at a loss. Therefore, Madam Speaker, in order to fund the increase of $736,513 to KEYS Foundation and the Pines Retirement Home, the KEYS Foundation, which is CAY2, and the Pines Retirement Home, NGS 64, the ministry identified savings of $736,513 from TP 41, poor relief payments of $375,000, TP48, benefit payments to ex-servicemen, 50,000, and TP60, housing assistance, 311,513 that would not have been spent during the 15-16 financial year. Madam Speaker, turning to sports, I will now look at the supplementary appropriations for that area. As you are aware, during the 15-16 financial year, I and the government made the decision to cease funding to the Cayman Islands Football Association, better known as CIFA, until further notice. It was not my intention to disadvantage the sport of football, especially our young footballers, and therefore, towards the end of 15-16 financial year, when I was advised that the preliminary qualifications for the FIFA Under-20 World Cup competition was set to begin on the 29th of June 2016, and that the Cayman Islands were included in Group 3, I agreed to fund the team preparation expenses. As the governing body for football in the Cayman Islands, Madam Speaker, CIFA is the only body permitted to enter a team in the World Cup competition. CIFA therefore authorized a group of professionals to prepare the Cayman Islands team for this competition. The group included an individual who had experience in managing national football teams in previous overseas competitions, but was not an employee of CIFA. In addition, the head coach was one of the Department of Sports community coaches. Madam Speaker, the group was also authorized to accept and expend funds on behalf of the team and to account for those funds independently of CIFA. Hence, they approached the ministry for assistance to meet the costs of their efforts to prepare the Cayman Islands team for competition. In order to effect this request, the ministry received approval to decrease the appropriation of NGS 60 sports programs by $27,775 and increase appropriation TP72 other youth and sports programs by $27,775. In closing, Madam Speaker and members of this Honorable House, I have explained the exceptional circumstances that made it necessary for the approval of the supplementary appropriations in the 14-15 and 15-16 financial years for the Ministry of Community Affairs, Youth and Sports. I thank you for your indulgence as the ministry works to support its agencies and continue to provide essential human and social services to the people of the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, I would like to also do a supplementary appropriation for the 16-17 financial year with your permission.
Permission granted.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, following the approval of the 16-17 budget year, the ministry received requests from the Hope for Today Foundation and the Bridge Foundation. With your indulgence, Madam Speaker, I will now outline in more detail these requests and the subsequent need for supplementary appropriations. The ministry received a request from the Hope for Today Foundation for funding to assist with the operation of their facility. As you may be aware, Madam Speaker, the Hope for Today Foundation is a non-government organization which provides a halfway house for recovering addicts and alcoholics to facilitate their transition from treatment to community life. It is funded primarily through fundraising initiatives and donations. As Minister responsible for Community Affairs, Madam Speaker, I supported the request by obtaining Cabinet's approval via Section 11.5 for $10,000. The funding of this new purchase agreement was offset against TP49, youth programs, and other non-government organizations. Madam Speaker, in addition to this, the chairman of the Bridge Foundation also approached the government to request the secondment of a counselor from the Caribbean Haven Residential Center to work with the Bridge Foundation for a period of 6 months. Again, as you may be aware, the Bridge Foundation is a non-profit, non-governmental, and non-denominational company that provides transitional or halfway house accommodation to recovering addicts from alcohol and other drugs, Madam Speaker. The Bridge Foundation promotes sober and structured living, educational opportunities, life skills development, self-determination, independence, physical and mental well-being, and spiritual development. The aforementioned request came as a result of the former program manager falling ill and not being able to provide the necessary oversight of the halfway houses. In order to prevent closure, Madam Speaker, the Bridge Foundation requested government support and technical assistance through the secondment of one of our employees. The secondment of this counselor from Caribbean Haven Residential Center, however, has reduced the staff complement at the center to below acceptable levels necessary to meet their program demands. In addition to providing counseling to clients who reside full-time at the Caribbean Haven Residential Center, Madam Speaker, counselors also complete drug and alcohol assessments in the prisons to assist the Conditional Release Board and the Drug and Summary Courts to determine the appropriate treatment for persons with a history of substance abuse. Given this, Madam Speaker, it is necessary to fill the vacancy created by the secondee's absence, since it is highly unlikely that a qualified counselor can be found who would be willing to accept the position on a part-time basis. Consequently, it would be necessary to fund the position for 1 year. Madam Speaker, in order to facilitate this, Cabinet approval was obtained to decrease TP48 benefit payments to ex-servicemen or veterans by $50,000 and increase HCA 30 counseling and support services by $50,000. In closing, Madam Speaker and members of this Honorable House, I have explained the circumstances that made it necessary for the approval of supplementary appropriations in the 16-17 financial year for the Ministry of Community Affairs, Youth and Sports. Once again, I thank you for your indulgence as we work to support our agencies and NGO services that work to improve the quality of life in these Cayman Islands. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Personal explanations?
None.
Overturn of the ceremonial speeches?
None.
Raising of matter of privileges?
None.
Government business, bills, second readings. The Public Management and Finance Amendment, number 2, Bill 2016.
Recognize the Honorable Minister responsible for finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Public Management and Finance Amendment, number 2, Bill 2016.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honorable Minister of Finance wish to speak thereto?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to present the Public Management and Finance Amendment, number 2, Bill 2016 on behalf of the government, which I shall refer to hereafter as the bill. Madam Speaker, Cabinet approved the appointment of the Public Management and Finance Law Review Committee, which I will refer to as the committee, to scrutinize the public management and finance law and its accompanying financial regulations. The committee comprised of Mr. Roy McTaggart, MLA, as chairman of the committee, Mr. Kenneth Jefferson, the financial secretary, Mistress Deborah Welcome, the former accountant general, Mr. Alistair Swarbrick, the former Auditor General, Ms. Doreen Whitaker, the representative of the government's chief officers, Mr. Vinton Chinsi, Chief Financial Officer, representative of the chief financial officers, Mr. Taran Jackman, representative of the Cayman Islands Institute of Professional Accountants, and Mistress Patricia Estwick, a qualified accountant and a private sector representative. The committee made 40 recommendations and conclusions for possible amendments to the law and regulations which are intended to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the government's financial management framework. Madam Speaker, on the 15th of October 2015, the Legislative Assembly approved the Public Management and Finance Amendment Law 2015, which included some of the 40 recommendations made by the committee. Those recommendations incorporated in the 2015 law were, number 1, changing the financial year from a 1st of July to 30th of June financial year to a 1st of January to the 31st of December financial year. The revised financial year starts on the 1st of January 2018. Number 2, adopting multi-year budgets and appropriations. Number 3, changing the deadline for the tabling of the strategic policy statement in the Legislative Assembly and changing the date by which the timing of each budget is to be published in the Government's Gazette. Number 4, changing the holding period for trust assets from 6 years to 4 years. And number 5, prohibiting ministries and portfolios from waiving government revenue, an ability that now rests solely with the Cabinet. Madam Speaker, let me present details with respect to the items that are in the bill that is now before this House. Number 1, Madam Speaker, is specifying accountability roles for the Chief Officer for Finance and to monitor compliance with the law. Madam Speaker, the committee reported that Section 54 of the law outlines the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance, but does not specify which officer within the ministry should be held accountable for these very important functions. The committee recommended that the Chief Officer for Finance be recognized in law as the overall leader of the government's financial accounting and reporting functions, and further, that the Chief Officer for Finance be responsible for carrying out the functions outlined in Section 54 of the law and for monitoring compliance with the law. Madam Speaker, the law is therefore being amended to make the Chief Officer for Finance responsible for performing the functions outlined in Section 54 of the law. The committee also found that accounting policies and procedures were inconsistent across the government, and that these policies and procedures should be consolidated into an accounting manual that sets out for all public entities financial, management, and reporting policies that are consistent with generally accepted accounting practices as required under Section 4 of the law. Madam Speaker, the law is therefore being amended to hold the Chief Officer for Finance accountable for establishing and publishing the Public Finance Manual. Section 54 of the law is also being amended to hold the Chief Officer for Finance accountable for monitoring compliance with the requirements of the law and for reporting contraventions of the law, reporting contraventions to the law and making recommendations for actions to be taken against those responsible for such contraventions. Number 2, Madam Speaker, defining the role of the Minister of Finance, the Financial Secretary, Chief Officers, and Chief Financial Officers. Madam Speaker, the committee reported that there was ambiguity in the law with respect to the roles and responsibilities of the Minister of Finance, the Financial Secretary, Chief Officers, and Chief Financial Officers. The committee therefore recommended that the law be amended to provide further clarity to these roles. Madam Speaker, the definition section of the bill, Clause 2, along with Clauses 12 to 14 and 20 to 23, define these roles and responsibilities to ensure that they are consistent with the Constitution, the Public Service Management Law, and job descriptions. With respect to empowering the Financial Secretary to deliver the government's quarterly and annual reports, Madam Speaker, as the overall leader of the government's financial reporting function, the committee stated that the Financial Secretary does not have any authority under the law to request financial information from public entities for the preparation of the government's budget and financial reports. The committee therefore recommended that Section 56, subsection 1 of the law be amended to give the Financial Secretary the authority to request information from public entities for the preparation of the government's budget and financial reports. The committee also observed that Section 56, subsection 2 of the law states that in the event of any non-provision of the information requested by the Ministry of Finance for the preparation of government budgets and reports, the Governor is the independent arbiter for determining whether or not the requested information is relevant. However, Madam Speaker, the committee recommended that it would be more appropriate to have the Minister of Finance be the independent arbiter in the event information requested for the preparation of budgets and financial reports is not provided. Madam Speaker, the law is proposed to be amended by clauses 23, which would change Section 56, subsection 1 and 56, subsection 2 to reflect the recommendations of the committee. With respect to approval of a supplementary appropriation bill before the end of the respective financial year. Madam Speaker, currently Section 11, subsection 6B of the law requires emergency supplementary funding to be approved in the next supplementary appropriation bill introduced in the Legislative Assembly. In the past, emergency supplementary funding has been approved in the Legislative Assembly up to 3 to 4 years after the funding had been spent. The committee therefore recommended that emergency supplementary funding be approved in the same year that the funds are spent. Madam Speaker, Section 11, subsection 6, paragraph B is being amended to require all emergency supplementary funding to be approved by the Legislative Assembly in a supplementary appropriation bill before the end of the financial year to which those transactions relate. This is proposed by Clause 4 of the bill. Section 12, subsection 3 of the law is also being amended to require advance approval of executive expenses and capital expenditures to be approved by the Legislative Assembly before the end of the financial year to which they relate. This is sought by Clause 5 of the bill. With respect to reintroduction of quarterly reporting for core government, Madam Speaker, the law currently requires government to table audited financial statements on an annual basis. The committee reported that the Legislative Assembly and the public should be provided with more frequent updates on the government's financial performance. The committee therefore recommended that the reintroduction of quarterly reporting for core government. Section 29 of the law, Madam Speaker, is being amended to require core government to publish unaudited quarterly financial statements within 6 weeks after the end of each of the first 3 quarters. Madam Speaker, it should be noted that quarterly reporting was previously a requirement under the law, but it was removed due to reporting challenges faced by public entities. Quarterly reporting is proposed to commence on the 1st of January 2018, which will allow government agencies sufficient time to implement robust reporting management systems. Madam Speaker, as the publication of the unaudited quarterly financial statements may not coincide with the meeting of the Legislative Assembly, the law is being amended to allow the report to become public documents once they have been published by a notice in the Gazette. The unaudited quarterly financial statements will also be placed on the government's main website. The unaudited quarterly financial statements will also be presented to the Legislative Assembly at its next meeting. Madam Speaker, Sections 29, 44, and 52 of the law are also being amended to require public entities and the entire public sector to prepare annual reports that provide the details of performance during each financial year. These proposed changes are dealt with in clauses 11, 16, and 19 of the bill. The Chief Officer for Finance will be accountable to publishing and tabling the government's unaudited quarterly financial statements and the entire public sector's annual report. Madam Speaker, the timelines for preparing the annual reports for the Office of the Auditor General to express audit opinions on the financial statements and for presenting the annual reports in the Legislative Assembly have not changed. With respect to the ministries, portfolios, and SAGC's annual reports, chief officers and managing directors will still have 2 months after the end of each financial year to have the annual reports prepared and submitted to the Office of the Auditor General, and the Office of the Auditor General still has 2 months after receiving the annual reports to express an opinion on the financial statements. Chief officers will then have 1 month to present and report the audit opinion to Cabinet. The annual reports will become public documents when they are presented to the Legislative Assembly at its next meeting. With respect to the entire public sector annual report, the Chief Officer for Finance still has up to 4 months after the end of the financial year to prepare the annual report and submit it to the Office of the Auditor General. The Office of the Auditor General still has 1 month after receiving the annual report to express an opinion on the financial statements therein. The annual report will be published by a notice in the Gazette within 6 months after the end of the financial year. The entire public sector annual report will become a public document when it is presented to the Legislative Assembly at the next meeting. Madam Speaker, with respect to clearer and simpler pre-election and financial updates, Madam Speaker, currently, Section 26 of the law requires the pre-election economic and financial update to include 2 years information with respect to economic forecasts and forecast financial statements. The committee reported that a 2-year forward outlook beyond or after a current financial year was inherently uncertain and risky, and that a 1-year forward outlook beyond or after a current financial year of economic forecast and forecast financial statements would be sufficient and was likely to become more certain and less risky. Madam Speaker, as you are aware, the information in the pre-election economic and financial update gives an unbiased overview of the state of the Cayman Islands economy and the financial position of the government prior to a general election. The bill proposes to amend the provisions of Section 26 of the law to require the Financial Secretary to issue and gazette no more than 42 days or 6 weeks, and no less than 28 days or 4 weeks before the date of a general election, economic forecast for the current and following financial year, forecast financial statements for the current and following financial year, and the most recent unaudited quarterly financial statements that are available at the time of the preparation of the report. Madam Speaker, as the release of the pre-election economic and financial update may not always coincide or occur with the meeting of the Legislative Assembly, the Chief Officer for Finance is responsible for publishing the update by a notice in the Gazette and posting to the government's website. The changes proposed to the law with respect to the pre-election economic and financial update are detailed in Clause 10 of the bill. Madam Speaker, with respect to removing the Office of the Auditor General from under the ambit of the Internal Audit Unit and permitting internal audits and control review of the Office of the Auditor General to be conducted. Madam Speaker, Section 57 of the law presently includes the Office of the Auditor General, or the OAG, within the ambit of the Internal Audit Unit. The committee reported that this arrangement raises issues around the oversight and independence of the Office of the Auditor General. In terms of good governance, it is unusual that internal auditors of government have the power to audit the government's independent external auditor, that being the Office of the Auditor General. The key issues with this section are as follows. The Office of the Auditor General is accountable to the Legislative Assembly, specifically the Public Accounts Committee, and not the government. 2, the Internal Audit Unit could be seen as a method used by government to constrain, influence, or undermine the work of government's independent auditors. 3, as the independent external auditor, auditing standards require the Office of the Auditor General to consider the work of internal audit as a source of assurance. This involves the assessment of the competence and ability of the Internal Audit Unit and the quality of their work. The fact that the law provides the Internal Audit Unit with the ability to examine the Office of the Auditor General potentially creates significant conflicts in this relationship. And finally, the independence of the Office of the Auditor General from government is undermined. Whilst the committee agreed that the Office of the Auditor General should be subjected to internal audits, they should be in line with with the principles of good governance and performed by an entity independent of the government, with a reporting relationship to the Auditor General and the Public Accounts Committee. Madam Speaker, Sections 57, 60, and 69 of the law are being amended to remove the Office of the Auditor General from under the ambit of the Internal Audit Unit and to require an independent auditor from the private sector to conduct internal audits and control reviews of the Office of the Auditor General. These changes are proposed by clauses 24 to 26 of the bill. Madam Speaker, further amendments to the bill, to the law, in addition to the changes to the law that I just outlined and which resulted from the recommendations of the committee, the following are further changes that are being made to the law. Allowing for additional and voluntary debt principal repayments without causing an increase to the debt service ratio. Madam Speaker, the current definition of the debt service ratio in Section 14 of the law means that government cannot make additional and voluntary debt principal repayments without causing an increase to the debt service ratio. Increasing the debt service ratio puts the government at risk of not complying with the principles of responsible financial management and the framework for fiscal responsibility. Madam Speaker, members will recall that in November 2016, the Honorable Premier, the Financial Secretary, and myself met with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London, and it was agreed that the early repayment of debt should not have an impact on the debt service ratio of the country. Madam Speaker, Section 14, subsection 3, paragraph C of the law is being amended to allow the government and the entire public sector to make principal repayments of debt which are not legally required to be made without impacting the debt service ratio. This change is proposed in Clause 8 of the bill. With respect to accounting for the pension funds and the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board, Madam Speaker, one of the reasons that the government is receiving an adverse opinion on its entire public sector consolidated financial statements is due to the omission of both the pension funds and the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board, or the PSPB, from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements. Madam Speaker, for clarity, the pension funds include the Judicial Pension Fund, the Parliamentary Pension Fund, and the Public Service Pensions Fund. The Office of the Auditor General has opined that the entire public sector consolidated financial statements should include the pension funds and the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board, primarily due to the government having control over the PSPB as defined by IPSA 6 consolidated and separate financial statements. Madam Speaker, the government agrees that the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board should be included in the entire public sector consolidated financial statements. However, the government is of the opinion that the assets of the pension funds should be excluded from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements and referenced as disclosures in the notes to the financial statements. The assets of the pension funds are for the direct benefit of current and retired public servants and not the government. Therefore, the assets of the pension fund, the pensions fund, should not be included in the entire public sector consolidated financial statements, as those assets of the pensions fund belong to public servants and retirees. The Attorney General's office prepared a legal opinion which concluded that amendments had to be made to the PMFL in order to exclude the pension funds from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements. Madam Speaker, I intend to present a committee stage amendment to the bill which will allow the government to exclude the pension funds from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements and to include the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board. Madam Speaker, there are a number of consequential changes and corrections of errors which are being proposed by the bill, and these include, number one, correcting the names of public agencies, for example, amending the names of the name of the portfolio of internal and external affairs to its correct and current name of Ministry of Home Affairs. Number two, correcting the names of budget documents to remove the reference to annual. Madam Speaker, as you know, the government has moved from annual budgets to two-year budgets. Number three, repealing and substitution of the subheading transitional arrangements, repeals, and consequential amendments in Part 8 and Sections 82 and 83 of the law. And number four, defining the role and clarifying the powers of the Director of Internal Audit and the Internal Audit Unit. Madam Speaker, the bill achieves the proposed amendments to the law that I have just detailed and explained. The clauses of the bill are as follows. Clause 1 provides for the short title and commencement of the resulting law. Clause 2 amends Section 2 to replace the definition entire public sector and to insert several new definitions, most notably Chief Officer of Finance, Financial Secretary, and published by notice in the Gazette. The clause also omits the unnecessary definition government, which is already covered by Section 124 of the Constitution and Section 3 of the Interpretations Law, 1995 revision. The definition entire public sector is to the same effect as to the existing one, but is simplified. Clause 2 also amends Section 2 consequentially on other amendments. Madam Speaker, I intend to bring a committee stage amendment to the House that will make an amendment to Clause 2. The intention of the committee stage amendment is to allow the government to exclude the public service pensions funds from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements and include the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board, as I previously explained. Madam Speaker, Clause 3 amends Section 7 to include a necessary cross-reference previously overlooked. Madam Speaker, I intend to bring a committee stage amendment to the House that will make an amendment to Clause 3. The intention of the committee stage amendment is to allow the government to exclude the pension funds from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements and include the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board, as I previously explained. Clause 4 amends Section 11 to provide that supplementary appropriation bills for authorization of transactions in advance of appropriations are to be introduced in the Legislative Assembly before the end of the financial year to which those transactions relate. Clause 5 amends Section 12 to provide that supplementary appropriation bills for advance approval of executive expenses and capital expenditure are to be introduced before the end of the financial year to which those expenses relate. Clause 6 relocates the effect of existing Sections 13, subsection 3 and subsection 4 about the Legislative Assembly's power to extend certain periods under the law as a new Section 12A in Part 2. Those subsections are currently incorrectly located. Sections 12A will also add a power for the Legislative Assembly to extend the period required under the law to introduce a bill. The clause also includes changes consequential on other amendments. Clause 7 amends Section 13 to make an amendment consequential on other amendments, require a supplementary appropriation bill for emergency expenditure, and to repeal subsections 3 and 4, which are to be relocated, as mentioned for Clause 6. Clause 8 amends Section 14 to allow for additional and voluntary debt principal repayments without increasing the debt service ratio. Clause 9 amends Section 24 to change the requirement to present a plan and estimates for each financial year to each budget period. This is because under the Public Management and Finance Amendment Law 2015, the plan and estimates document were changed from being annual to 2 yearly. Clause 10 amends Section 26 to provide that the election, economic and financial the pre-election economic and financial updates are to be for the next financial year rather than 2 financial years, and that they are to be included and that they are to include the most recent government quarterly report under the new Section 28. Clause 11 replaces Section 29 with the new Sections 29 and 28A. New Section 29 will require the Chief Officer of Finance to prepare unaudited quarterly reports for the core government, provide for Cabinet review of them, and for presentation to the Legislative Assembly. New Section 29A will require the Chief Officer of Finance to prepare government annual reports and provide for the auditing of their financial statements and schedule of their appropriations, Cabinet review of them, and for them to be presented to the Legislative Assembly. Madam Speaker, I intend to bring a committee stage amendment to the House that will make an amendment to Clause 11. The intention of the committee stage amendment is to allow the government to exclude pension funds from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements and include the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board, as I previously explained. Clause 12 amends Section 32 to make amendments consequential on the change in functions under the amendment to Section 54 from the Ministry of Finance to the Chief Officer of Finance, and for a new Section 29. Clause 13 inserts a new Section 38, which will require ministries and portfolios to have a Chief Financial Officer. The clause also provides for that officer's function. Clause 14 makes amendments to Section 45, subsection 1, consequential on amendments to Section 54. Clause 15 amends Section 42 to clarify that ministry and portfolio budget statements are 2 yearly and that the procedures for their making only need to be done once for the first year of each statement. The clause also omits provisions which will be covered by new Sections 82 and 83. Clause 16 replaces Section 44 about ministry and portfolio annual reports. Replacement Section 44 will clarify and streamline the procedures and timelines for making the report. Clause 17 amends Section 49 to change purchase agreements for statutory authorities and government entities from annual to 2 yearly. The clause also omits provisions which will be covered by new Sections 82 and 83. Clause 18 amends Section 50 to change ownership agreements for statutory authorities and government entities from annual to 2 yearly. The clause also omits provisions which will be covered by new Sections 82 and 83. Clause 19 replaces Section 52 about statutory authority and government entities annual reports. Replacement Section 52 will clarify and streamline the procedures and timeline for making reports. Madam Speaker, I intend to bring a committee stage amendment to the House that will make an amendment to Clause 19. The intention of the committee stage amendment is to allow the government to exclude the pension funds from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements and to include the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board. Clause 20 replaces the part heading to Part 6 and inserts new sections 53A and 53B. New section 53A will provide for the financial secretary's functions other than for the one already provided for under the Constitution. New section 53B will provide for who is the chief officer of finance and for that officer's functions. Clause 21 amends section 54 to change functions under that section from the Minister of Finance to the Chief Officer of Finance. Clause 21 also adds a function of preparing and publicizing a manual about how, under Section 4, about how entities are to comply with generally accepted accounting principles. The manual will replace certain provisions of the regulations which are out of date and will be repealed. The manual is a better means of providing detailed advice about the practice as the relevant international standards will change frequently. The clause also adds functions for the Chief Officer of Finance to monitor compliance with the law generally, to report contraventions and recommend actions about such contraventions, and for the regulations under the law or a job description under the Public Service Management Law 2013 revision, to confer additional detailed functions on the Chief Officer of Finance. Clause 22 amends Section 55 to make an amendment consequential on the amendments to Section 54 and to correct an error. Clause 23 replaces Section 56 about the power to request information for government reporting with Sections 56 and 56A and a new Part 6A heading for the Director of Internal Audit, which office the existing law mentions in Section 35I, but does not provide for or explain. Replacement of Section 56 in line with amended Section 54 will change the repository of the power to require information from the Minister of Finance to the Chief Officer of Finance. It also clarifies that the power applies for all of the functions under Section 54 and that the Chief Officer of Finance can also require entities to prepare and give documents needed for the functions. Rather than the Governor, the Minister of Finance is to be the arbiter of whether or not requested information or documents are relevant to the functions of the Chief Officer of Finance. A new Section 56A will provide for there to be a public officer called the Director of Internal Audit and for an internal audit unit of public officers to help the Director perform the Director's functions. That section will also provide for the Director's functions and for a job description to confer other functions on the Director. The Audit Office's management systems are to be independent of review by the Director of the Internal Audit Unit. Madam Speaker, I intend to bring a committee stage amendment to the House that will make an amendment to Clause 23. The intention of the committee stage amendment is to allow the government to exclude the pension fund from the entire public sector consolidated financial statements and include the operating expenses of the Public Service Pension Board. It keeps coming up. Clause 24 amends Section 57 to clarify the powers of the Director of Internal Audit and that of the Internal Audit Unit. Clause 25 amends Section 60 to make amendments consequential on the new and replacement Sections 29, 29A, 44, and 52. Clause 26 amends Section 69 to provide that the auditing of the audit office under Section 44, the independent auditor may also conduct.
Madam Speaker,
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
I just like clarification on the matter. I don't want to stop the.
Honorable Minister, will you give way?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to follow, but I'm having a difficulty in. I thought it was repeated about several times. I counted 3, and I'm not sure where he's at with it. Whether it is one amending bill we have, right? This is not. I mean, you know, in other bills we've had like 3 amending bills, but you're dealing with 1. I'm just trying to follow.
Honorable Minister for Finance.
Yes, Madam Speaker. It's one bill being amended, but various amendments.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
I know, I figured out because I only have 1 bill, but I'm still being, I don't want to say lost because they'll jump up too quick and say you already lost, but I'm trying to follow where you're at with this. It's several times repeated, the same thing. So maybe you could explain that.
Honorable Minister for Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for the question of clarification. Madam Speaker, the bill is being amended, and one of the amendments will impact the pension funds and the expenses of the Public Service Pension Board, but the amendment affects various clauses within the bill.
Please continue, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Clauses within the bill or sections within the law. Madam Speaker, Clause 24 amends Section 57 to clarify the powers of the Director of the Internal Audit and the Internal Audit Unit. Clause 25 amends Section 60 to make amendments consequential on the new and replacement Section 29, 29A, 44, and 52. Clause 26 amends Section 69 to provide that the audit Clause 26 amends Section 69 to provide that for auditing the audit office under Section 44, the independent auditor may also conduct periodic internal audits and control reviews, periodic audits and control reviews of that office. Clause 27 replaces the subheading Transitional Arrangements, repeals and consequential amendments in Part 8, and repeals Section 82 and 83, and replaces all of them with a new subheading and new Sections 82, 83, and 84. Existing Sections 82 and 83 are spent transitional provisions that are no longer needed. Section 25, subsection 2 of the Interpretation Law 1995 revision will save their ongoing operation for things that have already happened. Replacement Section 82 will group together all of the documents under the law that becomes public documents on their notification in the Gazette or presentation to the Legislative Assembly. Replacement Section 83 will require the relevant chief officer to publicly notify those documents on an appropriate government website for public access to such documents. New Section 84 will be a transitional provision to defer the new provisions about government quarterly returns from applying until the first quarter of 2018. Clause 28 amends Schedule 4 to correct an error and to omit a spent provision. And Clause 29 makes miscellaneous consequential amendments for the new definition, Chief Officer of Finance, to update Governor in Cabinet to Cabinet, and to correct some minor errors, to repeal Section 23, subsection 3, Section 24, subsection 6, Section 25, subsection 4, Section 26, subsection 3, all of which will be covered by new sections 82 and 83, and to update a reference to the portfolio of internal and external affairs. Madam Speaker, the remaining recommendations of the committee, which were accepted by Cabinet, require further research by the Ministry of Finance and will be incorporated in a future bill. These recommendations are to A, eliminate the distinction between entity and executive transactions, B, discard output budgeting and adopt input budgeting, and C, simplify the budget documents. Madam Speaker, I commend the Public Management and Finance Amendment Number 2 Bill 2016 to this Honorable House, and I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Recognize the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, I must say that I had no intention to speak, and so I just have a question. Is the minister intending to give a pre-election update of the budget as agreed in the last Finance Committee? And if he could answer that, Madam Speaker, I'd appreciate it at this point.
I take it that concludes your debate?
No, ma'am. I don't have very much, but I was asking him because I'd like an indication before I went on.
The difficulty that the chair has with that, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, is that on the bills, each member is allowed to debate for 2 hours, and we're not into question time, but if you could turn your question into part of your debate, and in his reply, he would reply to you.
I understand the position of the chair, Madam Speaker, but it's not a difficult thing for him to get up and say he's going to do it or he's not going to do it, and then I can go on. I know it's not a difficult thing, and I hope the chair would understand that.
The question, Honourable Minister of Finance, while you're on your feet, perhaps you can put the question that a question be put during debate time so I can get the will of the House so we would not be setting precedents.
Don't go that
and I'll
far,
put
Madam
the
Speaker.
vote.
Madam Speaker, don't go that far. I know it's not a precedent. I've been here 32 years. I know it's not, and I'm not trying to be insulting to you. I'm not going to go contrary to what you have stated. Let me just continue and hope that at that point, at the point that he's going to reply, I will listen and see where he's at that point.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, but I can tell you, you won't be setting a precedent. The amendment to put an update in the Gazette would simply mean that there would be no scrutiny by members. And I would rather hope that the update would be given at the pre-election update, that is I'm talking about, Madam Speaker, would be given at the last meeting of the House. The law could reflect that the last meeting of the House before prorogation would mean then that members would have ability to scrutinize what has been presented in the legislature, where the government would be answerable. I thought that he said that the update was going to be put in the Gazette in the case where there is no meeting of the House. But that could be easily organized by the government so that it does, any government, not just this one, so that I thought the minister said that it would be put in the Gazette if there was no meeting of the House. Maybe, I don't know if that's what was said, but I thought so. But what I'm saying is that the law should say that the update would be given at the last meeting of the House before prorogation, because of course that meeting would happen, and that's where our members could scrutinize. Madam Speaker, there is Madam Speaker, I will wait to hear the minister's response when he rises.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll recognize the Honorable Minister responsible for Finance, should he wish to exercise his right of reply.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Section 26 of the current law makes it clear that the pre-election economic and financial update is to be released no more than 42 days and no less than 28 days before the general election, Madam Speaker. And it is on that basis, Madam Speaker, with which it has to be done, because we won't have the time to do so. And that's just how it is, Madam Speaker.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, can the minister speak to I thought he was winding up the debate. I thought that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if he understood that.
Honorable Minister of Finance, was that the extent of your reply for the winding up of the debate?
Sorry, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, please forgive me. This is Madam Speaker, I'm a victim of those who are caught up in election fever. Madam Speaker, as I've said, Section 26 of the law requires that the pre-election economic and financial update be published by Gazette no more than 42 days before the general election and no less than 28 days before the general election. And, Madam Speaker, there isn't much more that can be said other than for me to ask that all members will support the bill. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, before the member
Honorable Leader of
sits,
the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, I did ask the member about the agreement when we did the two-year budget, that he would give an update to the House on where the budget stood. Is the member reneging on that agreement, or what is he doing? The minister, sorry.
Honorable Minister, I take it as a point of elucidation and your debate is continuing. If that's not the case, please indicate.
Madam Speaker, I am at a loss as to what the Leader of the Opposition is speaking about. I am not understanding what he's asking, and I don't have any memory of making the statement. I don't know what, if he can prove to me that I said it, then perhaps that may be the case, but to just say that I said so, I don't recall making a statement.
Madam Speaker, please allow.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, as the House knows, we all stood concerned about a two-year budget, but I, not wanting to stand in the way of government's progress and what they intended to do, I agreed. But in Finance Committee, could be very well in my budget debate also, but certainly in Finance Committee, we asked the minister whether he would give us an update on the two-year budget at this point. And the minister agreed on that. And, Madam Speaker, I know, again, I know the short time that we have here. I know the amount of work that we got. And again, I'm not wanting to stand in government and hold them up in any shape or form, as evidenced by my limited debate on certain matters. But I know that that was agreed. And one thing I have is a good memory. If we can't go to the papers, the Hansards, I know that's what was agreed.
Honorable Minister for Finance, did that cause you to
Madam
remember?
Speaker, I'm trying to clarify. We're both trying to clarify. You mentioned, the honorable leader of the opposition mentioned something about a 2-year budget. I would give an update on a 2-year budget. For the sake of clarification, Madam Speaker, is that what the honorable leader of the opposition is asking? For an update on the 2-year budget?
At this point, we wanted to know where.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Madam. Yes, Madam Speaker. We wanted to know where we would be as far as the budget is concerned.
The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, could we take it perhaps may be more efficient if we took a 2-minute break and I spoke to the leader of the opposition to understand exactly what he's asking, and then at that stage, I could then perhaps answer for the record, because I'm understanding him to say a report on the 2-year budget, and currently we're in an 18-month budget cycle. I'm gonna try to say that.
Madam Speaker, so we're not wasting time.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
That's what I'm talking about, is that period, that the current. That's what I said, 2 years, because I'm thinking when we presented it till now. But 18 months.
Minister of Finance, do you still need a break?
Madam Speaker, a break would be good. Give me a short time to confer and get a clarification on the point. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The House will now take its morning break.